Gentlemen, welcome to the two of you. I would like to start by asking, where would the $1 trillion US dollars come from? Mr. Pruitt, since you work for the Congress for a long time, help us understand.
Well, it's a combination of public and private dollars that the president's plan assumes. And I think there's more than $1 trillion worth of work to do. So there's plenty of opportunity to engage. And I think the Congress is just beginning to discuss those proposals in earnest. And I think the $200 billion that's on the table right now is really a starting bid in terms of what is possible.
That's right, Mr. Huang. $200 billion that is put out by the federal government trying to invite more investment from other state and private sector. And yet, with the politics going on in Washington, Mr. Huang, you know very well about that. And also, the timeline we are looking at when it comes to infrastructure, will that money be able to attract that many more, as large as $1 trillion eventually?
Yeah, you know, the two very interesting features of the proposal, although be it in only 6 pages, are privatization and public divestiture. So we're probably going to talk about the Air Traffic Control Corporation being privatized. But in addition to that, the memo has spelled out a vast number of other privatization and public divestiture proposals, such as the private use of real estate owned by the Department of Veteran Affairs, the divestiture of transmission assets owned by the Power Marketing Administration. In addition to that is the use of private use of rest areas on interstate highways. So the list goes on. And I think those features, if actually executed, will actually radically change the contours of infrastructure in America.
Really? I mean, is privatization likely to change the overall picture? I mean, gentlemen, those ideas have been brought up by the Clinton administration, by some of the even earlier administration. It's not a new idea. Why should we begin to believe that this time it's going to work?
Well, Tin, let me
it's a great
respond
question.
to that. I think there are two things.
Mr. Pruitt.
There are two things that are in play right now politically. One is, in America, we're seeing our bridges crumble. We've had a number of bridge collapses in the middle of major traffic periods. So there's visible evidence that there's much more needed to be done. Secondly, I think while there's a great deal of partisan bickering about the details at this point, we're very quickly approaching that time where both Congress and the administration are going to have to make a deal. And I think they both realize that. And now that we're into the summertime, when these decisions really need to be made, I think we're going to see a lot of behind closed door dealing go forward that we just haven't seen so far.
Right. If we talk about the infrastructure in the United States, as you said, Mr. Pruitt, let's take a look at some of those numbers. The U.S. has more than 6.5 million kilometers of roads and nearly 300,000 kilometers of rail. More than 13,000 airports are in the U.S., while China has 507. So those are the numbers if you compare the United States and China. The question really is, will those, whether it's crumble bridges or the U.S. determination to make still the lead of infrastructure in the world, be enough to be a wake-up call for all sides to really put in their resources? They have to see the benefits of it first. Mr. Huang.
Yeah, so that's exactly the point, that we understand there's no way increased federal subsidies is going to get past Congress, especially a Republican-controlled Congress. So the traditional mode of deficit spending won't work. So I think this is a very interesting and potentially exciting, bold attempt to bring private money into the fold. And we know that done well, it's going to spur a tremendous amount of investments. Done not so well, well, you know, the public might be left holding the purse. Because in addition to some of the things I've talked about, there's also an additional feature around public guarantee of private projects. So increase in such loan programs in the Department of Transportation, EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, et cetera, et cetera. So I think those are the key initiatives that from a businessman's perspective seem to be able to attract private investments.
But Mr. Pruitt, I mean, beginning from the privatization of the traffic control, really? I mean, if this early harvest, so-called, could not work, it's going to have a very ill effect on the rest of the plan, if there is a rest of the plan.
Well, I believe there will be a rest of the plan first. Secondly, I think we're in a period now, again, where the dealings are going to have to take place, and they're going to go behind closed doors very quickly here, and we'll start to get some sense of what the real shape of this plan will be. I would point out to you, though, and to your viewers, that there's already a good deal of private investment being made in infrastructure around the country. Cities and states all have borrowing powers. The municipal bond market is still alive and well in America. In one sense, what is being proposed is let's do the accounting so that we really know what is being spent across the board. What this plan does, and what I think the president's trying to do, unfortunately, is take credit for all of that. And as we know, or at least my mother always told me, that you get a lot more done when you don't worry about who gets credit. So I think at some point we're going to have to realize that, you know, let's get the job done first, and then we'll decide who gets credit for it.
Well, maybe the Chinese don't need the credit. Maybe the Chinese investment can come in, Mr. Pruitt, or some of the investment coming from other countries. You know, there's a Belt and Road Initiative going on over there. U.S. sending the delegation, but not as high level as you know, one would expect. The question is there going to be a crossroad with which these two things could work together, at least on certain areas? Mr. Pruitt, very briefly from you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think what we've got to do is continue to work on other aspects of our economy here in America to keep it straight and make it an even better investment market. I think the Chinese, others will come in as they see the improvements and the value in investing in America.
Mr. Huang, though, even if Mr. Pruitt sees the potential, how to work it out in order to achieve the potential, that is the biggest question.
Yep. So let me talk a little bit about public-private partnership, because I think if done well, it could work well. So let me give an example of an entity, the name of which I think everyone knows, but the structure of which actually a lot of people don't know, which is the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of America. It is actually a public-private entity, meaning at the central federal level, it acts much as a government entity. The chairman and the board of governors are appointed by the president. However, its 12 member banks are actually private corporations, actually owned by the member banks in those cities. So public-private entities could work if done well. And to your point about, you know, China's involvement, I think it has to and should happen. You know, when President Trump visited Saudi Arabia days before his arrival, a $20 billion infrastructure fund to be invested in the United States was announced between that country and Blackstone. With leverage, that number is going to go up to $100 billion. When Prime Minister Abe from Japan visited the U.S., he talked about, you know, selling high-speed rail technologies to the U.S. And prior to his arrival, a $50 billion fund investing in telecommunications and other areas was announced by SoftBank. So I think when President Trump and President Xi Jinping met, they had agreed to come up with a 100-day plan. And I would love to see infrastructure investing to be part of that.
It is what you are thinking also, Mr. Pruitt, that maybe foreign investment in infrastructure coming into the United States going to be mainly from China and the Middle East. Is that what you're saying also?
Well, I think China and the Middle East will certainly play major roles in what is to be built. I think there will be investors from around the world who will see value in investing in American infrastructure. I think we as Americans will also see the value there, and I think that will also shape some of the investment activity that you see with American dollars as